Hey guys, before we get started, I just want to say, I'm not like those other history YouTubers. I'm cool and edgy because I say the fuck word and kill stray cats. But of course, this isn't my story. This is the story of Geronimo de Aguilar. Aguilar was a Spanish missionary in Panama during the 1510s before being sent to the colony of Santo Domingo for a court case. Unfortunately for him, the ship he was on struck a sandbar off the coast of the Yucatan. The 12 survivors of the shipwreck, including Aguilar, as well as a man named Gonzalo Guerrero, were then captured by a Mayan tribe and set to be sacrificed. God, in his great mercy, however, gave the two men a chance to escape. Then, God looked away for a second and checked his Robin Hood portfolio, so they got captured by another Mayan tribe. Then, life happened. Aguilar and Guerrero, while slaves of the tribe, were still in many ways a part of the tribe. Guerrero married a wealthy local woman, they had children, and hell, he even became a war chief. But Aguilar never stopped being a Spaniard. He would never forsake Christ, nor his country. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, months into years, years into nearly a decade, until you were the Spaniard, yes? That's racist, but yes. Many more of you have come, in the big floating houses filled with excrement and rats, to the island they call Cozumel. They've asked to buy you from your master. Well, lop off my dick skin and call me a Jew. Are you serious? Okay, that is actually racist. Anyway, I've brought a message, and beads to purchase you, if you wish to return. What is it with you people and beads? What is it with you people and the shiny yellow metal and the dead guy on the stick? Just let people enjoy things, okay? Oh, just give me the fucking letter. Gentlemen and brothers, here in Cozumel I have heard that you are captives in the hands of a Mayan chief. I beg you to come to this place at once, and for this purpose have sent a ship with soldiers in case you need them. Also a ransom to be given to those Indians with whom you are living. The ship will wait for you 8 days. Come as quickly as you can, and you will be welcomed and looked after by me. Can you bring an Xbox 360 controller, by the way? I'm trying to convert the natives and have been using Minecraft Night to teach them about Jesus. Anyway, 8 days, beads, quite possibly your only chance at freedom ever, you get it. Smell ya later. Hernan Cortes. Holy shit, holy shit, holy shit. Can I have all those beads? Why do you need these beads? I leave the beads with your master, you come with me, you go on the big floating house filled with 8 million rats and 0 women. Don't you people like this sort of thing? I would go with you. But another Spaniard, one I've known for years, he's many days' travel from here, but I must bring him with me. And so, Aguilar traveled to Guerrero, and found that the trip was for nothing. Why won't you return with me? Dude, quiet down, my wife is right in the other room, and she already doesn't like me hanging out with you. You would so easily forsake your Lord and Savior. You wish to live here in the jungle, drinking blood, and worshipping demons. Alright, you clearly underestimate how fun those two things are, but even if they weren't, look at my fucking face, dude. I look like a roadie for Motley Crue that lived 10 years longer than I expected to. I've got several beautiful children, a gorgeous and rich wife, a pretty sick gig as a war chief, and, inexplicably, a mortgage somehow. I can't just leave. I know, we've lived here so long, I don't know if I can go back either, but I can't live here for another moment if... No, Aguilar, I lived here. You just were here. And you should go home. Aguilar would return to Cortez's ships, only to find them gone. His one and only chance at freedom had left the island of Cozumel, and was now en route to, I'm pretty sure those things are supposed to go on top of the water. I guess Jesus finally decided to throw Aguilar a favor, because one of Cortez's ships was taking on water, so the expedition had to return to the island of Cozumel for repairs, and Aguilar would get to be freed. Did you bring the controller? Yeah, but the only one I could find was one of those knockoff Mad Catz controllers. God, these savages. Did you know they dig straight down, too? Oh well, I'm just glad we managed to find you. Oh, you can imagine how I feel. I can't wait to return to my missionary work in Panama. Oh yeah, that's great. I love helping people for free, and with absolutely nothing done for me in return. I'd be happy to help with whatever you need. But what is that exactly? What are you people doing here? We just need a translator. I assume you've learned the native tongue? Well, yeah, I've learned Yucatec, but a translator for what? A project. I'm sorry for the next 2 minutes. It has been said that the best sources are not unbiased. The best sources are open about their bias. It was me, I said that. This is what I want when I do one of these things. I want a clean narrative filled with drama, stakes, big ideas, and yes, funny and interesting facts, so you walk away having learned something for once, you goddamn animals. I have 0 credentials, save for a rare form of autism I contracted from licking car batteries. I couldn't afford to go to college, so I joined the Air Force. Then some weird YouTube stuff happened, so when my contract ended last April, I decided to do this for a living. Yes, thank you. My parents are very proud, and because they refused to co-sign on my student loans, their credit score is intact. This is the perspective I bring. It's not a great one, but it's mine all the same. This whole project started with me reading a Wikipedia article about Aztec death whistles, which spurred me to investigate if there were any eyewitness accounts of their usage, and that led me to The Conquest of New Spain by Bernal Diaz. Bernal Diaz was a conquistador present on several expeditions, most importantly, Cortes's expedition, which would spell the end of the Aztec Empire. So I started reading it, and the narrative was incredible. It was thrilling, dramatic, fascinating, and emotional. It had heroes, villains, victims, strange alien peoples engaging in bizarre practices, and by the end of the book, I had the best video script I'd ever written. But something was wrong. Did I buy everything Diaz wrote? Well, of course not. I may have no credentials, but I've been around the block, and some of the shit didn't add up. And of course, Diaz had an agenda. I needed background, perspective, an expert's trained eye so as to properly iron out any outright lies Diaz recorded that I couldn't spot. So, you know that guy that's always going in all my videos and leaving super long-winded comments about the Aztecs? He pointed me towards the work of Professor Matthew Restall of Penn State University. And
Diaz billed his book as the true history of the conquest. In the New York Times and Chicago Sunday Tribune, reviewers of a modern edition of Diaz's True History called his words the most reliable narrative that exists, and the most complete and trustworthy of the chronicles of the conquest. But what if it is the opposite of that? Utterly unreliable, incomplete, and untrustworthy. Where does that leave us?
Give me just half a second. What the fuck?
God damn it! I had a nice, tidy little video about the fall of the Aztec Empire, and Matthew Restall, with his degrees, and his sources, and his facts, and his logic, he destroyed it! It was the best thing I'd ever written, and I had to watch him dismantle it, page by page, in slow motion, with ruthless efficiency. But then something funny happened. Yeah, something even funnier than my crippling despair and self-doubt. Where once I had a smooth and inoffensive narrative, I now had a web of Spanish laws and Aztec cultural norms and Tintin comics for some reason, and an endless succession of increasingly incorrect maps. Buy these books, if only so you can see the fucking bibliography. It was insane. It was destructive. It was equal parts inspiring and infuriating. How can I tell you the story of the fall of the Aztec Empire if that story is still being written? How can I depend on the words of Bernal Diaz at all if so much of it was an outright lie? Are the minor, more innocuous things he wrote accurate, and just a few key events are incorrect? Or is it just pure invention? The greatest lie ever sold on shelves, a lie bought and sold for century after century, convincing people, even to this very day. But how trustworthy is Matthew Restall? Sure, he actually went to college, sort of a lot, and I have found no compelling counter-arguments against the broader strokes of his work, but historians cannot get hard unless they're calling someone a fraud. It's just the way they are. He even went so far as to say the use of the term human sacrifice shouldn't be applied to the Aztecs, instead using the term ritualized execution, because those that were killed were usually actually prisoners of war. I don't get his point on this one, like, at all. That's just human sacrifice. Okay, I mean, hold on. Is this just a bunch of contrarian liberal garbage? The guy's a professor of women's studies, too. I mean, imagine that. Studying women. They be shopping. Ain't nothing else to say on the matter. God damn it, listen. Okay, we all know modern academics have a sorta, oh, who's a special little baby disposition towards people of a certain amount of melanin and estrogen. In the pursuit of the truth, did Matthew Restall go too far? So far as to throw away basic common sense. Matthew Restall is arguing against centuries of accepted wisdom, but holy shit, that bibliography, the sources he used, the extent of it, the work is there. It's on full display, whether you agree with the conclusions or not, and sometimes I didn't. I wanted to present a clean narrative, the commonly accepted one, but the commonly accepted one is clearly incorrect in just about every way, if not bullshit from start to finish. As we go along, we will encounter what I will call knots. This is where the narrative splits and becomes contradictory, confusing, and contentious. These knots are
The command knot, the Cholula knot, the meeting knot, the capture knot, the death knot.
These are the parts of the story where there are many conflicting accounts. You know why? Because guess what? This entire event is steeped in political bullshit from the time. So, as we pull the different contradictory threads, you learn a lot more than you ever could have from a traditional narrative. You will learn about the lies of Spaniards, historians, and natives alike. And, most importantly, what those lies were in service to. The lies in this story are lies we've told for centuries, and as such, are important lies that have shaped the world and the way we perceive it. This has been the most inspiring, complicated, and enriching project I've ever worked on. It has reinvigorated my love for my work, such as it is, and I hope that you will go on this journey with me. But, if you do, you need to be here for the long haul. So, let's make like Cortez, burn the boats, and get started.
You are aware that didn't actually happen, right?
Shut the fuck up! The expedition of Hernan Cortes set sail from Cuba towards the Mexican coast due to previous smaller expeditions finding significant amounts of gold, a mix of friendly and hostile natives, as well as rumors of a rich kingdom further inland. There was also a much more depressing reason that this expedition happened, but we'll save that for later. And that rich kingdom had heard of these expeditions as well, and tried to make contact with one of them, but by the time ambassadors had arrived, they'd already ran back to Cuba. So, here's the goal.
Mission objective. Get gold, then go home and party.
You may note that there's nothing in there about conquering shit. This expedition did not have the power nor authority to establish colonies or wage large wars. It is important to remember that conquistadors were not soldiers, which is to say, salaried, trained, armed, and empowered by the government. They were investors, and any legal authority they had needed to be authority granted by the crown. So that should be easy, right? When the expedition landed at Cozumel, that whole thing went off without a hitch. There was no gold, but, you know, it was peaceful, and those guys sure did learn to love Jesus. But once they continued on to Mayan territory on the mainland, it turns out that something had happened between the last expedition, where these tribes were friendly, and Cortez's expedition. Have you seen your boyfriend again? The white man is not my boyfriend. Yeah, right, dork. When the Spaniards visited our village, we killed 56 of them. What did you do, huh? You traded. Like a woman. I did not. Yeah, did too. I bet you don't even want to die covered in blood and feces during a massive battle with a technologically superior foe. I'll show you. I'll show you next time the white man comes. I suppose that shaking a weapon and waving your naked erection around is how these people say hello. Crewman, I demand you bring me my musket and my finest dick pump. Ah, Hernan Cortes. The great diplomat, they'll call me. A series of skirmishes occurred while the Spaniards landed on the beach and built camp in a Mayan territory they expected to be friendly. And it is thanks to the translations of Aguilar that the Spaniards learned it was going to get worse. One of their Indian captives had escaped, gone to the other side, and said, well, what you would expect, to the locals. So should we trust these white men? No! The entire region was now against Cortes, according to Diaz. I'd wager it might have been just one or two tribes, but regardless, in a decisive battle, further inland, now called the Battle of Cintla, superior Spanish swords and Cortez's massive, intimidating erection saved the day. Don't ask questions. As I said in my last video, Bernal Diaz wasn't a historian, so he has these weird sort of Diaz-isms. For example, during an earlier expedition, Diaz saw a bunch of evil-looking idols, and he wrote,
Others went so far as to affirm that they, the natives who worshipped and or carved the statues, were descendants of the Jews whom Titus and Vespasian had driven from Jerusalem, who had been shipwrecked off this coast.
Yeah, so I've actually read about and talked about Titus and Vespasian and the Second Jewish Rebellion quite a bit. I am not a historian, I'm a guy, once again. I read books about events, then I tell you what the books told me after applying as much critical thought as a YouTuber's brain is capable of. And then I pin a comment with all the books listed and, if you want to know more. Out of all the times and places of history, though, one in which I consider myself particularly knowledgeable is the Second Jewish War and the start of the Flavian dynasty. I've read easily over 1,000 pages on the subject and written dozens. And dude, I got no idea what the fuck Diaz is talking about. I'm not saying he's wrong. Obviously he's wrong. I'm saying the statement is so huge and out of place that it doesn't even feel like a statement. It's more like this weird version of Tourette's that he has. He just does that. He'll say the craziest shit you ever heard in your entire life, but it's always buried in the middle of super benign statements, like it's not a big deal. It's horrible. And this is what it's like reading it.
The people of the Cocoa Valley are fond of a local tree which bears a strange dark fruit that the cocoa people turn into a hot beverage, not dissimilar to coffee. The beverage is energizing and refreshing, and we enjoyed it often. This is, of course, much like the Baja Blast people who live on the Mountain of Dew and enjoy Baja Blast at their local Taco Bell. The Cocoa Valley contains many rocks of varying sizes. I touched one, it was hard. Attached are 57 rough sketches of the valley's many exciting rocks. Guard them with your life.
Anyway, Diaz said of the Indian reaction to seeing cavalry.
Oh, right, sorry. The Indians thought at that time that the horse and rider were one creature, for they had never seen a horse before.
Thanks, Diaz, that was very helpful. Regardless, after this battle, Cortes suspected the Indians may have considered the horses and cannons to be conscious. Diaz doesn't say why this is. I assume it's because Cortes has a really fine-tuned expert's grasp on racism. You understand? He was a professional. So Cortes arranged to meet with the Mayan leaders for peace talks, after loading up a cannon which was to be fired when he gave the signal, and ordering a stallion to be hitched to a post that had previously hitched a mare in heat. So this is how the peace talks went. We apologize for our attack, and come bearing gifts. Well, I forgive you, but, well, my hands are sort of tied. What do you mean? The cannon is angry at you! Oh no! What is wrong with the giant deer? He's angry with you too. Why does it have such a large erection? He's really mad. I absolutely believe that Cortes believed the natives believed that, but I wager they left the whole ordeal more confused than anything. Regardless, the Spanish and the Mayans learned to exist in peace forever and ever, don't worry about it, and Cortes even passed his charisma skill check. So he taught him some Jesus and tore down their old idols. I'd love to move on from here, but first, I want to tell you a story about a princess. This princess was born to a member of the Aztec nobility around the year 1500, and given the name Malinali, after the goddess of grass. Her father, unfortunately, died while she was young, and her mother married a new man and bore him a son. Her mother, wishing for the son to inherit everything, would sell her daughter into slavery, and even go so far as to have a sham funeral conducted. Malinali would be sold from place to place, learning both the Aztec language of Nahuatl and the Mayan language of Yucatec, until, in the year 1519, she found herself gifted to Cortes, among 19 other women, by the Yucatec Mayan leaders, as a peace offering. Cortes would take her as his sex slave and translator, and while Spanish priests would baptize her with the name of Marina, she has gone down in history as La Malinche. La Malinche is a complicated figure. She would give birth to Cortes's son Martin, one of the first mestizo children, which is to say, a child with both native and Spanish ancestry, so she's considered by some sort of a symbolic mother of the modern Mexican people. But her actions as translator for Cortes naturally gives her a reputation as a traitor. She would, years after the events of our story, be married off by Cortes to a conquistador, therefore losing her status as a slave. So, you could interpret her actions as throwing her people under the bus for personal gain, but, she didn't gain much, she just gained her freedom. Sorta. Regardless, the translation chain that needed to exist for communications with the Nahua people, which is the ethnic group the Aztecs belonged to, was now established. La Malinche would translate Nahuatl to Yucatec, then Geronimo de Aguilar would translate Yucatec to Spanish. Bear in mind, despite my silly little pie people bullshit, that's how the Spanish are going to communicate from here forward. so it's fair to doubt significant portions of their account on that basis alone. You can see from Aztec illustrations how omnipresent she was during all of this. She was vital. She was so omnipresent, in fact, that the Aztec tended to call Cortes Malinche as if they were both the same person. Mexicans today have a term derived from her name, a fact which was thankfully brought to my attention by a cool dog on Discord. That term is Malinchista. To call someone a Malinchista is basically calling them a combination of an Uncle Tom and a Benedict Arnold. I am largely uninterested in remarking upon Mexican attitudes towards their complicated and bloody national history.
With the notable exception of this propaganda poster, this picture goes hard, for real. Feel free to screenshot.
But it seems that only in academic circles has La Malinche's image been rehabilitated, and her reputation remains among most outside the academic liberal arts circle jerk the reputation of a traitor of the highest possible order, a traitor to both her people and her nation. La Malinche's thoughts have not survived the passage of time. While we have many letters from Cortes, legal documents, and the accounts of eyewitnesses such as Diaz, we do not know how La Malinche felt about any of this. In Mexican popular culture, La Malinche is often portrayed as enthusiastically helping the Spanish, as she was in love with Cortes. While that is possible, and she could harbor some resentment of her people for her treatment, this whole thing feels tantamount to accusing a Jew of supporting the Nazi war machine because, of course, many of them did. They were coerced into doing forced labor. Oh yeah, German efficiency was not real. They just used insane amounts of forced labor and were invading a largely demilitarized Europe. So yes, you can attribute what military successes the Nazis did accomplish to the superiority of the Jewish Übermensch. Oh, please, L'chaim. My delicate gay German wrists can't possibly build this railroad. Oh, whatever will I do? Have no fear, my genetically inferior friend. Stand aside, and I'll build as many railroads as it takes to... What is this for again? It's for transportation? Transportation to what? The matzo ball and dreidel factory? I do like those things. That's actually the way it happened. Stay woke. Anyway, I have a very character-centric method of discussing history. I like to consider the human, the forces and trends they're trapped within, and how they react to them. Scipio Aemilianus set the city of Carthage ablaze, only to look out at it and wonder how long it would be until Rome found the same fate. Smedley Butler finished his long and accomplished military career, only to spend the rest of his life traveling the country, giving the same speech over and over. And it started with, "War is a racket. It always has been. It is possibly the oldest, easily the most profitable, surely the most vicious. It is the only one international in scope. It is the only one in which profits are reckoned in dollars and the losses in lives." I would like you to bear in mind the words of based King Smedley Butler as we continue to discuss this oddly profitable, glorious conquest of savages. Regardless, it is that fear, that doubt, that guilt that changes them from names, symbols, heroes, or villains to people, trapped within the machine of civilization and being ground by the gears until they fit into place. Did La Malinche have a moment of doubt? Did she love Cortes, or only obey him? Perhaps she didn't know what he was capable of until it was far too late. While it is possible that she felt affection towards him in a sort of sad, sick way, Cortes did not love her. He was a famous womanizer, with his palace filled with sex slaves, and he only mentioned her twice in all his letters to Spain and only once by her actual name. Later, when Cortes's wife made her voyage to the New World, Cortes would get rid of Malinche, with aforementioned marriage arrangement. She was absolutely instrumental to the fall of the Aztec Empire. Without her, it probably wouldn't have happened, but just because that's the case doesn't mean she wanted it to happen. She was a tool, used for that, and tools' feelings don't matter. I find it impossible, after reading so much doubt and fear and pain from conquistador and native alike, that La Malinche felt nothing. We're almost done with this, but I have one more thing I want to say on this matter. Diaz, disturbingly, would mention that it was known among the conquistadors who treated his native women well and who treated them poorly. Those treated poorly tended to suddenly disappear and never be seen again. In many ways, you could argue Cortes treated La Malinche well for her seemingly loyal service. But you should make no mistake. This woman has disappeared, and in place of whatever she thought or felt or desired, there are only political agendas projected onto her. After the peace talks with the Maya, the Spanish sailed further up the coast to Aztec territory, landing at San Juan de Ulua, and this is the beginning of formal communications between the two empires. It should be noted here that the Aztec had been tracking Cortes for a while at this point. While Cortes was fighting the Maya, Montezuma was receiving intel. So Cortes met some Aztec ambassadors, fired a cannon again to scare them, because it's funny. The Aztec took a conquistador helmet to show Montezuma, and then they brought it back, filled to the brim with gold dust, along with countless other treasures and gifts. We hope you will share these great gifts among yourselves and bring word to your King Charles that Montezuma is a kind and powerful ally. Of course, I'd be happy to, but, well, could I meet Montezuma? I wish to give him some gifts in person, and even a nice hug. Well, Montezuma wishes to meet with King Charles, actually. You yourself said he is the great emperor of your people, correct? Oh, I see. No hard feelings? Of course not. Our great friendship will last 1,000 generations. But there is one problem, however. Oh? Have you ever heard of my main man, JC? It stands for Jesus Christ, and he's totally yeet. I do not know what this yeet is, and yet I feel you are not using it correctly. Loving Jesus is totally gangsta. I'd love to tell you more about it tonight. We're doing a chill, laid-back Minecraft tournament at the rec center later. Think you'll be there? Well, we actually already have our own religion. Hey, that's totally cool, bro. We can just play Minecraft and have a great time. I suspect that the time had will, in fact, be awkward for all involved. Furthermore, the fact that you continue to insist upon my presence at this function makes me think you're not as chill and laid back as you claim to be. There'll be pizza? Oh, okay, what time? And then it turns out you can't win Minecraft, so a tournament doesn't even make sense. We just had to take turns. Cortes had just been told that kids liked Minecraft, so he thought it would help make us like Jesus. My God. What lies and treachery. They tell you, oh, it doesn't have to be about Jesus and the Bible and stuff. We're just having fun. But then it is about the Bible and stuff. And they say there will be pizza, but it's just those cheap square pizzas. And there isn't enough for everyone. It's like 2 slices per person. He made me use the Mad Catz controller. These men, what do they desire? Why have they come? What does it matter? They speak only lies. We should throw them back into the sea from whence they crawled. To what end? They're no threat to us. You say they are treacherous, but does the serpent not strike? Does the jaguar not claw? And yet, they are still subject to my will. No, you don't mean... String them along, Ambassador. They want gold, then the gold will flow. Right to me. All right, computer, the plot is thickening. Can you hit us with 2 topics from the Fun and Light folder?
Contained within the Fun and Light folder is mostly pornography of dubious legality and unhinged rants about the Zionist agenda exhibited in the latest Marvel films, both of which are against YouTube's terms of service, as well as common decency.
Apply the parental controls, please. But keep in the thug shaker. I might need that one for when these guys get bored.
Loading. God and violence.
Nice. I was hoping for those. We tend to be a bit hard on the Spaniards, for the countless atrocities they committed in the name of God, but we should note where they're coming from here. Literally, where are they coming from? The Iberian Peninsula, which contains modern-day Spain and Portugal, had been a region of serious religious conflict between Muslims and Christians for centuries by this point, only ending the very same year Columbus discovered Hispaniola with the defeat of Granada.
Several elements framed the Spanish colonization of the Americas. The first was the Reconquista, the 7-century-long process of reconquest of much of Iberia from Muslims who first invaded the region in 711. The protracted Reconquista often proceeded in fits and starts, and the frontier between Muslim and Christian territories was permeable, with sides not always clearly defined. Encyclopedia.com.
Really, computer? Encyclopedia.com?
This format makes it difficult for the viewer to distinguish between commonly accepted wisdom and your spicy YouTuber hot takes. I thought it prescient to establish that this is, in fact, the most boring take imaginable. Regardless, the Reconquista had a profound influence on the development of Iberian Catholicism and Iberian society. Iberian Catholicism became highly chauvinistic, exclusivistic, and militant.
The discovery of the Americas slotted nicely into the emerging national identity of the newly united Spain.
The philosophy of the discoveries, the emigration, and the colonization was Christianity. Ferdinand and Isabel, king and queen of a new, if precariously united Spain, had conquered Granada in 1492. They had been hailed by the Pope not only as the Catholic kings, but as athletes of Christ. Conquest, Montezuma, Cortes, and the Fall of Old Mexico by Hugh Thomas.
Every Christian kingdom believed God to be on their side, but the Spanish had significant reason to believe themselves to be the sword of Christ, as they had so far been exactly that. So you see, the Spanish had to do all these terrible, terrible things. Case closed. Let's move on and...
Oh, please, you can't be serious.
God damn it, computer. Now I gotta fucking say shit. The Spanish did not need to go around making everyone love Jesus, or else. You know how I know that? Well, because they didn't always do it. On Bernal Diaz's first 2 expeditions, 0 Jesus. These were primarily scouting expeditions with a bit of trade, but those expeditions found gold. So now, coincidentally, the Spanish had a massive boner for Jesus. But regardless, was Spanish religious zealotry rooted in history and a cultural trend rather than, just a personal moral failure of these individual men?
People are trapped in history, and history is trapped in them. James Baldwin. So in short, yes.
And was Cortes trying to pick a fight, so he had an excuse to steal shit, and justifying that fight with religion was politically convenient as it preyed upon the emerging Spanish national identity?
Oh yes, absolutely. That guy was a dick. It is not that religion motivated Cortes, rather that religion justified Cortes. Why Cortes in particular required justification for his actions will be made apparent later. Once this pie person gets all his dick jokes out of the way.
In the meantime, the Spanish decided to head towards a fortified town they'd heard about, named but they got intercepted by 24 natives while en route. They wanted Cortes to meet the king of their city. Cortes accepts, and the expedition is escorted to Zempoala. Here, Bernal Diaz writes that the beauty of the city is dwarfed only by the fatness of its king. We appreciate all the food. I can tell your town has plenty to spare. Is that a fat joke? No, that was a sentence. You're the fat joke. Alright, Dick, listen, do you know what's going on here? No, I don't speak Aztec. We are not Aztec. We are the Totonac people. We are subjects of the Aztec. Also, they call themselves Mexican, pronounced Mexican, as far as I can tell, but for the purposes of clarity, this video will apply the term Aztec to describe them. They're robbers, liars, and cheats. Well, I'm glad I'm here then. I promise to help in any way that is possible, and to prevent these thefts and crimes, since it was for this purpose that our Lord, the Emperor Charles, has sent us to these parts. Really? If you're willing to buy that, sure. Well, we promise to guide you through these strange lands you have zero understanding of, and would never deceive you into furthering our personal political agenda. Wow, you guys are so cool. You know who else was pretty cool? But then, 5 Aztec tax inspectors arrived to the town with impeccably horrible timing. They were taken prisoner by Cortes and the Totonac, but Cortes had his soldiers secretly bring 2 tax collectors to his tent in the dead of night. OMG, guys, what happened? We were taken prisoner by you. Whoa, that's crazy. These Totonac guys sure suck, huh? Please go back to Montezuma and let him know I am a friend to the Aztecs.
The following morning.
What? Where did the other 2 prisoners go? I didn't eat them, all right? You can't prove that I did. Well, regardless, it's clear you can't be trusted with them. I shall move them to my ship for safekeeping.
1 ship embarking later.
All right, you're free. Go home. Montezuma friendly. One big misunderstanding. You get it. No? I feel like we're missing something. What's going on? I don't fucking know. I'm scheming here, man. Just go tell Montezuma I shit rainbows or something. I don't give a shit. With these moves, Cortes accomplished 2 things. Number 1, the Totonac people were now in open rebellion and imprisoning tax collectors. And number 2, Montezuma had been weakened, but was still unsure if the Spanish were at fault. At least, this is the Spanish interpretation of what happened. Considering the lack of native accounts and Cortes's ignorance of the area and its complex web of allegiances, we may never know. But I have found, while writing this video, it's generally best practice to assume Cortes is not as much of a master manipulator as he and his supporters like Diaz were saying he was. Reading between the lines, my personal interpretation was that Cortes's big driving instinct was to muddy the waters, to confuse the natives as much as they confused him. However, one could argue, as we will later, that Cortes was inconsistent, because what is often attributed to Cortes should rather be attributed to a select group of influential and experienced captains who constantly fucking bickered. We'll get into that possibility in more depth later. Regardless, we see here that Cortes has studied Sun Tzu's art of war, always troll when given the opportunity to do so. It is at this point we must discuss who exactly this Hernan Cortes was. Hernan Cortes was appointed as captain of this expedition by Cuban governor Diego Velázquez. Velázquez was a man with much experience in the New World, even being present during Christopher Columbus's second expedition in 1493 and leading the invasion of Cuba. Cortes would also participate in that invasion, but seemed to have done nothing to distinguish himself. Cortes's appointment as captain was controversial for the simple reason that Cortes had once participated in a plot to get the Spanish king to remove Diego Velázquez as governor, and had even been imprisoned for a time by him. To quote from Machiavelli's The Prince, an ancient guide on how to rule,
"If a man tries to stab you in the back, you should not later give that man 608 men, 16 horses, 11 ships, 32 crossbowmen, and 13 musketeers."
The reason Velázquez gave Cortes, a man of little renown and dubious allegiances, this appointment, he thought he could control him, presumably due to his relative obscurity and inexperience. Cortes couldn't exactly disobey Velázquez if Cortes couldn't command respect from his men, and what authority Cortes had was derived exclusively from Velázquez. Velázquez needed a dog on a tight leash.
Velázquez wanted someone to lead the venture who would first show more imagination than the last expedition leader, and second, be able to finance part or even all of the expenses. But he did not want it to be a great armada of conquest. That would be led by himself when he had authority from Spain.
That sounds smart, right? Well, guess what? So does phrenology.
Cortes was, above all, a survivor, and in the lethally dangerous world of the 16th century Spanish Indies, that made him highly untrustworthy. When Montezuma met Cortes by Matthew Restall.
Velázquez would end up changing his mind at the last minute, but Cortes already had the guns and ships and men, and he told him to kick bricks. So you can already see that Cortes is already in, well, a very Caesar-like position. He even made the classic, "die as cast" comment. His command could be insanely profitable to himself, but was also illegal. But also, let's be real here, doesn't the guy with the guns decide what's illegal? Or rather, do the men holding the guns decide? Julius Caesar's iron grip on his legions was unquestionable. Caesar led them against barbaric Gauls in the frozen north, Egyptians in the Sahara, and even against other Romans. I'm reminded of the time when Caesar's legions, after their retirement kept getting delayed by all these goddamn wars that Caesar just kept starting, decided to mutiny the moment Caesar needed them most. So how did Julius Caesar get them back under his command? He thanked them for their service, told them to go home, and called them civilians. So they all cried and hugged it out and went to Africa to do some epic trolling to Cato.
Caesar also had the ringleaders of the mutiny killed, but sometimes it be like that.
Isn't that a great story? About command, respect, identity, and loyalty. It is. But here's the important part. It fucking makes sense. Caesar was accomplished. He had shown himself to be ruthless, bold, effective, but also forgiving and incredibly generous when he was able. Cortes was tight-fisted and paranoid, even according to Diaz. Beyond that, Cortes could not appeal to his men's sense of service and fraternity like Caesar did. Conquistadors certainly felt some sense of national pride and faith in their religion, of course, but these men had not spent years fighting and training together as a cohesive unit. This was like most conquistador expeditions, a loose coalition of armed and fundamentally self-interested investors looking for profit. Despite the claims by Diaz of Cortes's charm and grace, men don't follow charming and graceful men into hell. They follow effective and dependable men into hell. Are you gonna go die for a used car salesman who's already double-crossed his boss? Caesar conquered Gaul, led an adventure to the cold, mysterious Isle of Britain, defeated Pompey the Great in open battle, instigated then ended an Egyptian civil war, then some fuckface in Turkey thought he could take advantage of all this Roman instability, so Caesar came and saw and conquered. What did Cortes do before the fall of the Aztecs? Nothing. What did he accomplish after the fall of the Aztecs? Failure after failure. Before the fall of the Aztecs, Cortes was Velázquez's personal assistant, and after the fall of the Aztecs, he would in time be removed from his position of governor of New Spain. At this point in our story, Velázquez sends news to Cortes that he'd received the title of Adelantado. I'm trying, I promise, which translates to advance, and should be thought of as sort of a forward man. This title is what Velázquez had been waiting for when he initially authorized Cortes's expedition, as it gave him the right to not just trade or explore, but to conquer and establish forts. Adelantado was, to put it simply, a license to loot. This compelled Cortes to stop a mutiny from some Velázquez loyalists and send all the valuables found so far to the Spanish crown as, well, a bribe.
This is King Charles V. He would rule not only Spain, but also the Holy Roman Empire. Why, yes, he is a Habsburg. How could you tell?
As discussed in the last video, the Spanish crown taxed 1/5 of the booty found in the Americas, so Cortes's action was both a bribe and a cocky move intended to communicate, man, you can have this gold for free. We're gonna find way more. Unlike that loser Velázquez. Velázquez hears of this and sends a message to the crown declaring Cortes a total treasonous dick who should be arrested. Bear in mind as our story continues that the Spanish crown is actively mulling over this fight, as the fight is, of course, for who will administer these new territories. Cortes would win this battle, but lose the war. As we progress through this story, it will become clear that Cortes was, in many ways, used by the crown. But for the moment, Cortes needed a big win. His back was to the wall. Anything less than a massive success would lead to legal consequences. Cortes's attempt to bribe the crown with gold was only the beginning. He was going to bribe the crown with an empire. But who exactly was bribing the crown? This is the command knot. Greater men than us have tried to untangle it, but thankfully we can copy their homework when they're not looking. Has every decision assigned to Cortes actually been Cortes's decision? Considering the lack of actual experience and the fact that he was accompanied by captains with a ton of experience, could it be that Cortes was, in practice, a puppet? Perhaps. Velázquez's instinct that Cortes was easy to control was absolutely correct. The only problem was that other men would end up in control. Cortes could even be interpreted as the fall guy, who just lucked out enough to be given credit for what occurred, rather than being blamed for what occurred and executed for it. In Diaz's account, the other captains beg Cortes to break with Velázquez, establish a colony, and actually go to Montezuma. On the surface, this is an act of unwavering loyalty to Cortes, but does it reveal a more complex truth?
The truth was so obvious that Bernal Diaz blurted it out. The plan to invade the Aztecs was hatched by the dominant group of captains. Diaz was eager to place himself at the center of the group, which was surely unlikely. At least half a dozen documents were composed, signed, and sent to Spain over the course of the next 6 months, revealing a clear agenda and commitment on the part of a core faction of captains.
Regardless of who made the call, the Spanish scuttled their ships and built the colony of Villarica de la Veracruz, a name which translates, "Stop it, you are such a pain in the ass, cat." A name which translates to, "the rich village of the True Cross," a name more Spanish than a bullfighter getting gored because he decided to take a siesta mid-bullfight. Now, this is a topic of contention. Matthew Ristall speculates that the ships were actually rotting and in disrepair, so the decision was made to beach them and salvage the iron fittings and riggings.
Puerto Carrero and Montejo, who were questioned the following spring in Spain, testified that it was ship captains and pilots who determined that their ships were rotting, and they proposed the beaching. Even Tapia, who otherwise follows Gomara's contrived tale of Cortesian cleverness, admitted that several captains reported that their ships were unseaworthy.
Less than 10% of the Spaniards that were present during this would survive to tell the tale. That's less than 25 people. Among those, how many would even be able to argue against Cortes? Cortes was writing letters to Spain at this time, which were printed and spread through Europe like wildfire. In fact, they were so popular that the printing of them would be restricted by King Charles V in fear of Cortes's growing popularity. Beyond that, later in his life, he and his son would commission a book by historian Francisco López de Gamarra, which was, of course, very favorable to Cortes, and mostly constructed of his personal account. How could Cortes command such an absolute, unwavering loyalty from his men if he had, prior to this, never commanded any men at all? How could he be so ruthlessly effective here if, after this, he was always horribly ineffective? The story is breaking down, the story told for centuries, the story of Cortes boldly putting down a mutiny, taking control of his men, burning his ships, and founding the first colony in Mexico. Was the first permanent colony in Mexico a bold political move by Cortes, or was it a decision pinned on Cortes by a small group of experienced captains, and Cortes accepted because he saw his one and probably only chance ever at fame and fortune? Were the ships dramatically destroyed by Cortes, so as to give his men the resolve needed to commit to a bold conquest, or were they just salvaged for parts because they'd become unseaworthy? The ships definitely were not burned, by the way. That does not appear until much later accounts. Regardless, Villarica de la Veracruz was created to control the narrative, and the only question is whose narrative it was.
The founding of Villarica de la Veracruz permitted a given group of conquistadors to turn themselves into a cabildo, and they thereby acquired standing sufficient to make certain kinds of resolutions, laws, and other legally valid decisions.
The goal of Cortes's expedition, explicitly, according to the legal documentation permitting it, was
to acquire as much gold as possible and, having acquired it, return with it to the island of Cuba, in order that it may be enjoyed only by Diego Velázquez and the captain, Cortes.
Yeah, in the beginning of this video, when I said the mission objective was to get gold and party, I was not being facetious. I like providing, historical context and stuff, but, these guys were apes. At one point during this expedition, some of the conquistadors would get mad at Cortes for keeping all of the hot sex slaves for himself. Cortes would assist in the destruction of one of the greatest empires ever built, and his primary motivation, besides the obvious benefits, was justifying his illegal actions to the crown. Villarica, as a colony, even if it was still under construction, could elect a town council, or cabildo. The town council declared the expedition of Diego Velázquez complete, relieving the men and Cortes of any obligations they had to the governor, and therefore giving the men the freedom to choose a new objective.
New objective. Tell Montezuma to stop doing human sacrifices.
Cortes would of course say that this new plan to literally walk into Montezuma's throne room and tell him to love Jesus, or else, was motivated by Aztec cruelty. Obviously though, the objective was a politically convenient one. It was basically just a backwards-ass way to declare war, because Cortes couldn't declare war. He had zero authority to do that, and that would result in some very big lies down the road. If you walked into the president's office with a handgun and demanded he stop doing capitalisms, that's declaring war on America, or so I've been told by my lawyer. So, the Spanish began a several days long march, braving cold mountain passes they had not prepared for. They stopped for a bit at a small town called Cocotlan, and the town's lord directed Cortes to Tlaxcalan, a small kingdom unfriendly to the Aztecs, yet totally surrounded by their empire. Unfortunately for Cortes, the Tlaxcalteca did not much like him either, as his messengers he sent ahead were imprisoned.
As Fray Juan Diaz reported, here were people who lived in stone houses and had laws and regulations and public places assigned for the administration of justice. They had fine clothing, gold, abundant food, and were skillful in various ways.
The Spanish in the New World had by this point mostly fought natives in the Caribbean, but the interior of Mexico, where they were now, was the most advanced and populous area of the New World. According to Diaz himself, Montezuma could field over 150,000 troops, whereas the Cortes expedition numbered only around 600 at its peak. And these were not exclusively fighting men. The Spanish were fighting among stone houses and streets and fields of corn, and the political system was otherwise independent city-states who were compelled by the Aztec to supply tribute and soldiers in time of war. This is what you must keep in mind as the Tlaxcalteca attacked the Spanish, in the largest engagement the Spanish had seen up to this point. At one point during the battle, some of the Tlaxcalteca attempted to capture a Spanish horse, but, well...
They slashed at the rider's mare, cutting her head at the neck so that it only hung by the skin.
This is who we're talking about here. These people the Spanish are fighting are not the Aztecs, they're enemies of the Aztec, and one of them nearly beheaded a horse by accident. The weapon used, though, would have been similar to Aztec weaponry. The Macuahutl fucking god, that's how it's spelled. A wooden bat, lashed with shards of obsidian, was a fucking terrifying two-handed sword wielded by Mesoamerican warriors. Imagine the sheer blunt force of a massive two-handed club, further augmented by sharp obsidian blades, which provide plus 10 damage and the "oh god, what the fuck is that" status effect. Obsidian, to be clear, is an insanely sharp material, still used in surgical tools today. Of course, the downside of obsidian is that it's more brittle than the ego of a YouTuber, but even after it's broken, you still got a big fuck-off club. But forget about weaponry. The Aztec at this time were no joke. Montezuma had extended the empire's borders to their furthest extent. Cortes did not stumble into a fading empire, he stumbled into one at the peak of its power, albeit, dare I say, a little overextended and politically unstable, judging by the restlessness of its subjects and the fact that Montezuma often had to put down rebellions during his reign. That being said, he would put them down with a fucking vengeance. According to Aztec tax records, they had over 350 distinct tribes paying tribute to them. I'm saying all this because I need you to understand that when Cortes entered a region supposedly anti-Aztec and therefore friendly to him, he was still getting attacked and sustaining serious casualties. The Tlaxcalteca response to the Spanish is, of course, very understandable. The Spanish were an unknown quantity. Why were they here? What did they want? Were they gods? No, and we'll get to that crock of shit later, but they were fucking weird and unknown. These questions would be asked of Cortes by every native he spoke to, and each one, it seemed, got different answers. Cortes was not a great military mind, he was a water muddier. At every available chance, he misled the natives he came across, feeding contradictory information. Yeah, real 5D chess kind of guy, huh? Always in control of the situation. Except for in Tlaxcalan, as the Tlaxcalteca people there had mistakenly believed Cortes was an ally of Montezuma. I don't blame them for thinking that, considering he'd said as much like 10 goddamn times. Furthermore, he entered the region from Aztec territory with Native American allies who were, at least nominally, Aztec subjects. Morale at this point was, well, we want to go home, but we just got here. Yeah, we know. We haven't even fought in Aztec yet, and we're still taking casualties. My stomach hurts. Derek's stomach hurts. Oh well. We can't all be big dick adventuring bad boys for Jesus like me, I guess. I got some shirts made for all of us, but I suppose that was just wishful thinking. It was nice adventuring with you boys. Just take the boats home, and I'll see you when I see you. The boats are rotting on the beach. Well, I can't be blamed for that. I'm a Sagittarius. Just take all that gold we got and go home already. You sent all of our gold to Spain, so as to undercut the Cuban governor and get the king's blessing for your insane suicide mission to... What is this? What are we even doing? We are going to ask Montezuma, the powerful and cruel god king of the Aztecs, to stop doing human sacrifices. You're going to walk into the throne room of a man whose job is to kill people, and ask him to stop killing people. Yes. You don't think he's just gonna kill you? Now, why exactly would someone kill someone after learning that killing is bad? Come on, man, think with your head. What will you do if he refuses? I'll kill him. Thankfully, Tlaxcalteca attacks subsided, as Cortes's many peace messages were finally agreed to. They sent the Spaniards many splendid gifts, among them, some old ladies? Now at this point, other natives had gifted women to the Spaniards already, but they were usually young and, for boning. These old women were gifted for eating. The Tlaxcalteca were unsure if the Spaniards ate people, at least according to Diaz. I guess it's nice to cover your bases. At this point, Cortes has as many suitors as the only unimpregnated girl in an Alabama middle school. Both Tlaxcalteca and Aztec messengers were visiting Cortes. The Tlaxcalteca wanted Cortes to come visit their capital and make the peace official, whereas the Aztecs told Cortes not to visit the capital, as the Tlaxcalteca were sneaky and treacherous. In the end, though, Cortes would visit Tlaxcalan.
The badly bruised company spent 17 days in Tlaxcalan, roughly a day of recovery for each grim day of warfare. Almost every Spaniard had suffered wounds of some kind, and while most recovered, some died, reducing total Spanish numbers to fewer than 250, half the force that had left Cuba. The survivors must have been traumatized and terrified. Their relief at being able to experience the hospitality rather than the hostility of the Tlaxcalteca must have been tempered by the knowledge that the invaders were at the mercy of their hosts, dependent upon them for food and supplies, for information about the Aztecs, and for allied warriors to protect them from whatever came next.
While in Tlaxcalan, Cortes would meet with the Tlaxcalteca leader, the blind old king, Xicotenga. You must understand, our attacks came from our fear, not our fury. My son, who led the attacks, he believed you to be allies of the Aztec. Those guys? I can't stand them. You arrived armed and armored, marching in formation with an almost entirely male force. You're lucky I'm blind. If I saw how you rolled up to my kingdom with my own two eyes, you would have been dead a week ago. You walked in here disrespectful as shit. Okay, maybe the optics weren't great. You must understand the fear my people have for the Aztecs. We fought them many times over the last century. While we are brave, they are many. And time has seen their empire grow to surround our peoples. You know the Aztec ambassadors are sitting right behind me, right? No. Obviously, I do not know that. I'm blind. It's my thing. Fuck you, old man. You know who can cure the blind? Who? My main man, JC, stands for Jesus Christ. He's totally hip. And I think it would be cherry of you to cast down your evil demonic statues or else, and worship the one true God. When can this man arrive to cure my blindness? Oh, well, I mean, it doesn't really work like that. Oh, really? Then maybe you should shut the fuck up. We've known each other for 2 weeks, and half of that time we've been killing each other. Read the room. Maybe you should read it first, you blind bitch. Oh yeah, and Xicotenga showed Cortes a giant bone and explained how his people were descended from giants. It was probably like a mammoth bone or something, so, that's cool. Or it was a giant bone, stay woke. Cortes at this point decides to continue on to Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, through the city of Cholula. Famous for its hot sauce, which is not nearly as good as Louisiana-style sauces, I'll see you in the comments section. And the city of Cholula was also where Aztecs would prepare for invasions of Tlaxcalan, according to the Tlaxcalteca, at least. The Tlaxcalteca-Spanish War was short, but of huge importance. Cortes had gained a massive ally, but lost much to gain it. Let's recap. Before this, the Spanish had interacted with the natives on Cozumel, some Mayan tribes, the Totonac, who were just waiting to revolt, and the Tlaxcalteca, who were longtime Aztec enemies. But from this point forward, that's done. This is deep Aztec territory. But were they at war with the Aztecs? That is what is fascinating about the story from this point forward. Cortes and Montezuma are in a constant state of, we're at war, but I'm not sure yet, both attempting to maintain plausible deniability. And naturally, when he showed up at the gates of Cholula with 1,000 warriors of an enemy nation, they were pissed, refusing to allow them entry, and forcing the Tlaxcalteca to camp outside the city, while the Spanish were allowed inside. And this is the Cholula Knot. It is a topic with centuries of heated debate, but in the interest of transparency.
These are the things we can say with reasonable certainty. 1. The Spanish entered the city on October 10th, while a significantly larger contingent of Tlaxcalteca warriors were kept outside the city. 2. They stayed there for a much shorter time than they stayed at other cities, somewhere between 3 and 5 days. 3. The Spanish and Tlaxcalteca would surprise attack the people of the city, cutting down many unarmed men, women, and children in what has since become known as the Cholula Massacre.
Seems cut and dry, right? The Spanish were bastards. Sounds good. I hate Catholics anyway.
Don't you think this event, considering it's the first military engagement against Aztec subjects by the Spanish-Tlaxcalteca alliance, merits closer investigation? The Cholula Massacre was actually exceedingly strange behavior from the Spanish.
God damn it, fine. To untangle the knot, let us examine the threads involved, which is to say, the conflicting and contradictory narratives that to this day are tossed around wantonly, like your mom's panties at that Alice in Chains concert you would end up being conceived at. Here's the Bernal Diaz thread. When the Spanish arrived in Cholula, the welcome party was chilly. In fact, shockingly, they did not choose to accept the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ into their hearts. Can you fucking believe it? And it just kept getting worse. During the several days Cortes stayed, the noblemen there stopped bringing food, and when Cortes asked what was up, they apologized and later returned with just firewood and water. The Spanish even noticed Cholulan residents would laugh at them from the distance, in a mocking manner, and the city, while grand and impressive, was remarkably empty.
All was now prepared. The soldiers whom Montezuma had sent with such speed were hidden in shelters and thickets about 1.5 miles from Cholula, while others were posted in the houses, and all had their arms ready. Breastworks had been built on the roofs, holes had been dug in the streets, barricades had been erected to impede the movements of our horses, and in some of the houses they had collected the long poles, leather collars, and ropes with which they were to secure us when they led us to Mexico.
Ooh, that's kinky. Some Totonac allies alerted Cortes to hidden holes dug in the streets and filled with spikes so as to stop cavalry. Some Tlaxcalteca alerted Cortes to the fact that the Cholulans had done a great sacrifice to their war god during the night. And La Malinche was pulled aside by the wife of a chief and told that Montezuma had planned a sneak attack on the Spaniards, and begged Malinche to run away before it was too late, because her son needed a wife and Malinche had one of them holes that babies came out of. Cortes bribed a few native priests for the full lowdown on what was going on, and found that Montezuma had ordered this sneak attack to be carried out while the Spanish exited the city. The hills were filled, supposedly, with Aztec warriors. The night before the expedition left Cholula, the conquistadors planned, and the following morning, all the nobles and priests of the town were gathered in a courtyard. "We wish you luck on your journey, Cortes." Luck? I have no need of such things. I have the power of God, and anime on my side. Anime? Oh, in 500 years, these guys on the other side of the world are gonna make this thing called Dragon Ball Z, and your descendants are gonna be obsessed with it. But, that doesn't matter. We didn't gather you here for a farewell. Then, why are we here? I offered you Minecraft. Excuse me? Minecraft. Ice cream socials. We were even going to do a lock-in at the community center and spend all night playing Wii bowling. But it seems your people do not understand the virtues of such acts, the simple pleasures of Jesus-sanctioned youth-centric after-school activities, the sweet taste of a warm Capri Sun during an afternoon game of flag football, because you people have a taste only for blood, and the games you play are ones only of treachery. We can play some Minecraft, and Minecraft night is over. Let's try a sermon, something Old Testament, some fire and brimstone. Have you ever heard the story of Sodom and Gomorrah? The heavily armed and armored Spanish cut down the treacherous noblemen and priests trapped helplessly in the courtyard. Those left in the city would of course attempt to escape, but the Tlaxcalteca were waiting for them. In fact, considering the very small distance between the two cities, during the days of bloodshed, more Tlaxcalteca would come, and the carnage would only get worse with time. Diaz takes time to blame the Tlaxcalteca for their overwhelming bloodlust and greed in the conflict, but frankly, bloodlust should be expected. They'd been fighting Aztecs for a century by this point, and were just handed a golden chance to fuck them up. At least they had a reason to be mad at these guys. This is just the way humans act, It's like judging a dog for doing that thing they do, where they sorta do a little circle before they lay down. What the fuck's up with that anyway?
I'm not going to let you keep watching. Interrogate the text, you fool. I swear to God, this is just like that time with the Holocaust and the kitten calendar.
Well, someone's got to figure out why dogs do that, but regardless, the account obviously favors the Spanish, Cortes, and their allies. It makes the Aztecs out to be treacherous, the Spanish out to be sharp and observant, Cortes out to be decisive and in control of the situation, and of course, it makes the Totonac and Tlaxcalteca out to look like strong and supportive allies. Let's examine the second thread. This is the account of Bernardino the Unpronounceable de Sahagún, a man who assembled his account a few decades later from the testimonies of Cholulan natives who were present during the attack. So, this is the closest thing we have to the other side of the story, unfortunately. Native words pushed through a Spanish pen, but do bear in mind, these native words are Cholulan words, not Tlaxcalteca words.
The Spaniards went to Cholula, taking the Tlaxcalteca and Totonac with them dressed for war. When they arrived, they shouted for all noblemen, rulers, captains, chiefs, and also the men of the town to assemble in the courtyard of the gods. When they had all gathered, the Spaniards and their allies blocked the entrances, all of the places where one could enter. In the first moment, people were murdered and beaten. Nothing like this was in the minds of the Cholulans. Without swords or shields, they met the Spaniards. Without warning, they were treacherously and deceitfully slain. They were ambushed because the Tlaxcalteca persuaded the Spaniards to do it.
There are other versions of this event. In Cortes's letters specifically, he says that he got tipped off by La Malinche, and that's the only tip that he got. This strikes me as very safe. If this was a mistake, it was a native woman's mistake. If Cortes lost control of the narrative, throwing an entire civilization that was indispensable to the war effort under the bus, that's a bad idea. Throwing a single native woman under the bus, well, that's pretty easy. Regardless, was the Cholula massacre a Spanish attempt to get ahead of a planned Aztec attack, or were they tricked into committing this atrocity by their allies? My initial not untangling led me to the following conclusion. It's okay if it's not yours. The Spanish were on edge, the Tlaxcalteca wanted blood. The Tlaxcalteca knew the area and its politics, and leveraged this to their benefit by tricking the Spaniards into assisting in an assault on their old enemies. But Matthew Restall brought something absolutely incredible to my attention. But for the significance of it to be understood, unfortunately, you will have to learn some things about history.
Wait, is that not the point of all this nonsense? What is the point of this video if not learning more about history?
Computer, I made this video for one reason and one reason alone: to dunk on Catholics. Anything else is a distraction, but here we go. The Aztec Empire could be more accurately described as the Aztec Triple Alliance, a term many history nerds now use, but not me, because I'm cool and I fuck. And also, in the 100 years during which the empire grew, Tenochtitlan would emerge as the dominant political force and de facto leader. The second most prominent city, with serious little man syndrome, was Texcoco, and the third burnout black sheep of the family was Tlacopan. The Tlaxcalan government was very similar. Another regional triple alliance between cities where over the decades one would emerge as the de facto leader. In this case, the city of, Tlaxcalan, which was ruled by the aforementioned blind king Xicotenga, which is the Spanish version of his more accurate Nahuatl name, Xicotencatl, but fuck that. The thing is, the Tlaxcalan Triple Alliance wasn't a triple alliance by the time the Spanish had shown up, because several years before their arrival, Cholula had defected to the Aztec. Xicotenga, what is best in life? To crush your enemies, to see them driven before you, and to provide shocking plot twists to YouTube videos made half a millennium from now. Furthermore, Cholula was a strange place to stop on the way to Tenochtitlan. There were other cities with plenty of supplies on a more direct route. Already, it looks like the Tlaxcalteca were dictating where the expedition would go.
The fact is, neither Cortes nor his fellow captains were in control. The Tlaxcalteca led the Spaniards to Cholula for their own political purposes, telling the Spanish captains that it was on the way and rich in supplies. The alleged Cholulan ambush was probably a Tlaxcalteca ruse devised to manipulate the captains, or as Alva Ixotlilxochitl later wrote, an invention of the Tlaxcalteca and some of the Spaniards.
Cortes may have already lost control to the veteran captains in the expedition, and those captains may have then lost control to their Tlaxcalteca allies, who vastly outnumbered the Spanish and obviously, knew what the fuck was going on. Either the Spanish were scared and handed power over willingly, or they were just totally and absolutely politically outmaneuvered by Xicotenga. The Spanish are at this point numbering only 5% of the total expedition between the Totonac, African slaves, Taino slaves, and the massive Tlaxcalteca contingent, which made up the vast majority of this, the world's worst blunt rotation. Regardless, we're approaching the thing. We've covered a lot of ground, and I think before we reach the thing, we need to talk about something. This is the part of the story of glorious conquest, where humans start being fed into a wood chipper. And I need to ask you to do something difficult. I need you to look up and see what's coming out of the other side of the wood chipper.
The history of the world is but the biography of great men. Thomas Carlyle.
History can be perceived through many different lenses, one of which, known as great man theory, posits that great men from history are born great and end up shaping history, as opposed to history shaping them. As you could imagine, this used to be a popular idea, but is now considered a childish and outright incorrect way to engage with history. I've observed a new theory spread among, bug people, and adherence to their worldview. Terrible man theory. If you'd like to know what a bug person is, check out this link, then come right back, or I'll find you. The history of the world is but the biography of terrible men. This is just as stupid, and you need to stop, because it's actually an incredibly dangerous worldview. I would argue, nearly as dangerous as great man theory, which obviously is like fucking, right-wing creep catnip. The one thing I get from my perspective, woeful it may be, is I am obsessed with context. The sticks and carrots of a civilization's culture, economics, and politics. Julius Caesar killed 1/3 of the population of Gaul, and enslaved another third, and honestly, he probably didn't. He just said that he did. He wrote a book where he bragged about it, because Rome's political, economic, and social environment rewarded military conquerors. It was the surest method towards political success, riches, and social status. Julius Caesar did not make Rome. Rome made Caesar. He would have been the best goddamned used car salesman in the greater Toronto area if he was born today to a lower middle class family in Canada, because Julius Caesar, well, I have heard it said by honorable men that he was quite ambitious. Ambitious men and women are born every day. The human desire for status is universal. What is not universal is how you achieve that status. Do you want to spread the glory of Rome? To reclaim the Holy Land? To meet the production quotas of the 5-year plan in only 4 years? To be an Instagram influencer? You don't actually want those things. You just want money, acclaim, power, and respect. And the society you're in told you that's how you get those things. Do you refuse to be productive and clever? Have you totally rejected the virtues of your civilization and instead live under a bridge, a shameful outcast refusing to play the game whose rules were set before your birth? If so, that does make sense. You're my primary demographic. But if you're anything but a homeless schizo under a bridge, you want to be celebrated, you want to be important, and you want money. So did they.
Conquistadors were often younger sons, or younger sons of younger sons, forced by the size of their parents' families to find a career in order to live, and had been obliged to choose between the church, the sea, or the court. They were men driven by several motives: to become rich, to become famous, and to extend the dominions of Christianity.
To be a good little conquistador was to be eventually rewarded with an encomienda. Unfortunately, I don't know what that is. Computer, what is that?
The encomienda system was a system that's purpose was nominally to teach the natives about Christianity and European civilization, while they also helped work a conquistador's land. In practice, however, it was a system of slavery necessary to fully exploit the economic potential of these new lands. As the native population collapsed over the decades due to a combination of brutality, disease, and being worked to death, African slaves would be brought in to replace them. Indians were argued to be subhuman so as to justify this abhorrent treatment in the same way Africans later would be.
This was the path to success for these men. So they took it. Of course, there were dissenting Spanish voices. As the flow of blood from the New World grew from a trickle to a torrent, many men would decry these actions as evil. Most famously, Bartolomé de las Casas, a man who we will discuss in detail later. Cortes made his choices, and he should be judged for them, and rest assured we will, but the deeper you look, the more apparent it becomes that Cortes wasn't just a product of his time. He was merely a tool in a grander system of exploitation, used by Velázquez, used by the other captains, used even by the Tlaxcalteca, and particularly used by the crown itself. The problem is not the actions of Cortes. The problem is that his actions were handsomely rewarded with power and wealth and acclaim. If Cortes didn't do these things, Velázquez, the captains, the crown, well, they would have found someone who would. The problem isn't that a CEO is greedy. It's that a CEO's job is to be greedy, and the job pays handsomely in respect, influence, and cold hard cash. If you're the CEO of Nike and you refuse to outsource and use sweatshop labor to make your new gay pride Nikes, then Nike's board of directors and shareholders will just find someone who will. Your job is to use sweatshop labor to make the gay pride Nikes. This is why bug people don't like context. It is not that context spares Cortes from judgment, as they would argue it does. It's that it puts the spotlight on the bug people. I'm not concerned with the matter of Cortes's mortal soul. I'm concerned with the conditions that make having a soul a liability. There's an alternative reality where Diego Velázquez is the man people think of when they think of Spanish atrocities. These men were fighting over the privilege to do this shit. The system needed monsters to work, so they paid men handsomely to be monsters. Beyond that, they were inspired to be monsters. The Tale of Amadis was an Iberian story that, to oversimplify, was essentially an Iberian King Arthur story about a valiant and chaste and strong knight in a mythical kingdom. It was actually incredibly popular among conquistadors, and when the thing happens, Bernal Diaz even name drops it. You know how all the bug people and those that listen to them talk about Ukraine like it's the Avengers and Russia like they're Thanos? That's not new. I am sorry. Future students will have to learn about the goddamn Marvel Cinematic Universe in school in order to truly grasp the late-stage American Republic. You did this. I blame you. The stories you tell people provide the framework through which they perceive the world. The die is cast is a line from a Greek play. Thank God, Caesar did not watch Marvel movies. Wow, a point of no return. A gamble of unprecedented stakes. Do you have anything to say on it, Caesar? So that just happened. Wow. So iconic.
The Tale of Amadis, the most successful printed book of the early 16th century in Spain, though written far earlier, accompanied conquistadors as much as did prayer books and books of hours.
Remember when Iron Man came out and it was about the greed of arms manufacturers and American imperialism? That was weird. I sure am glad that now superheroes just punch CGI space monsters in a heckin' wholesome and inclusive way. The stories we tell to children inspire their actions as adults, and their actions as adults are either rewarded or punished by the society they exist within. Why did King Charles look the other way for Cortes when he was so obviously breaking every law and motivated by avarice rather than loyalty to God and country? He needed money and access to rich lands, and after 30 years of exploitation, the Caribbean was a wasteland.
Everywhere in the Caribbean, the Indian population declined almost to nothing in the course of 2 generations. The Spanish Caribbean in 1518 thus seemed a ruined place. The Indians washed for gold and died young, while the Spanish-fed livestock seduced the native women and read romances. The crown seemed uninterested, except where profit could be obtained to finance the royal adventures in Italy. The crown allowed the tropical autocrats a free rein, provided that they at home could enjoy bizarre titles indicating Cuban or Puerto Rican responsibilities, and provided that products were sent home which could be turned into money, especially gold.
Bug people like to focus on lay evil racism because they don't want you to question the system you exist within, what it has compelled you to be, and what sort of person our system rewards. Spanish colonization was a business that's doing just swell to this day. The business of leveraging military might to enforce economic conditions which enrich the invaders, and it should all be discussed on that basis and from that perspective. Cortes would be condemned categorically for his atrocities by the crown several months after his death, when the money was made and it no longer mattered. You think Cortes was a piece of shit? Congrats, you're about 5 centuries late with your hot take, bug person. Everyone knew he was a monster. Nobody cared he was a monster. The gold flowed. Cortes was a dime a dozen. He was a conquistador. He was one among many, and they were just about all the same. They were men inspired by both the stories of great heroes and their belief in a particularly militant sect of Christianity forged by centuries of conflict with Muslims, and these stories and beliefs would morally justify any action, no matter how obviously evil it was, to the public and the crown. These men were rewarded for their actions with not just plunder, but slaves to work the land they'd taken. And any atrocities committed were ignored by the government, which granted these lands and slaves, because that government was given 1/5 of all the plunder found, and besides the first 2 expeditions of Columbus, the crown didn't need to spend a cent to get this gold. Conquistadors were investors. They invested in arms, armor, and ships, with the belief they'd find enough plunder or enslave enough natives to make it worth it. It's a hell of a racket. I wish I'd thought of it. Could have taught Al Capone a few things with this one. And the worst part is,
Cortes was virtually deified, recognizable as a legendary icon, not as a credible historical human being.
making him a villain is nearly as bad as making him a hero. Regardless of whether or not it's bad or not, though, it's certainly wrong. When you pull back the curtains of Cortes the Great and Powerful, you see the men around him who influenced him, the Spanish legal system which looked the other way, the history which shaped him, the stories which inspired him, and the economics that enriched him. Context matters because you should interrogate your context. How have the gears of civilization ground you? What has the world compelled you to be? Dunking on dead men is the pastime of bug people, and it does nothing for anyone other than their ability to sleep at night. And maybe they should try sleepy time tea instead. That fucking bear's a drug dealer, let me tell ya. Behind every slave in history is an investor looking for profit. Thank you for watching. I can't begin to tell you how overwhelming this project has been, and we're only about 2/3 of the way done. But now, finally, we're at the meeting. We came to a broad causeway and continued our march, and when we saw all those cities and villages built in the water and that straight and level causeway leading to Mexico, we were astounded. These great towns and temples and buildings rising from the water, all made of stone, seemed like an enchanted vision from the tale of Amadis. Who could now count the multitude of men, women, and boys in the streets, on the rooftops, and in canoes on the waterways, who had come out to see us? So, with luck on our side, we boldly entered the city of Tenochtitlan on the 8th of November, in the year of our Lord, 1519.